Race.
Well, I wanted to enter the race for a couple of reasons. One of them is growing up on my grandfather's farm, I was taught three basic goals, and that was respect, hard work, and loyalty. And in doing that, I also wanted to pay it back because that was part of the learning lesson. And I knew someday that I wouldn't. First of all, I'm going to go out, conquer the world, but I knew someday I wanted to come back truly and pay it back to the community who gave me my start. I feel very strongly about that, and I think I'm proving that. Um, with that in mind, I also know that as I'm going after some of these things, like for the school, I'm going for grants. I'm good at finding money and trying to find spare money here and there. And when I go after these grants, I always have to get letters of support from our legislators. I found myself always going to Representative Preston and Senator McBroom to try to get letters of endorsement, of course, and they did their due diligence to make sure that it was something very worthy of supporting. They don't just throw their support willy-nilly. And I wanted to make sure, or I guess I wanted to say, well, if I'm doing all this, why? I think maybe I should just cut out the middleman and go for, running for office. And I know darn well that that will be hard work on my part as well to try to get that done. And so that was another reason why I said, if I'm going after all this, why not cut out the middleman? Well, one of the things that makes me unique and very lucky is that I come from the eastern end of the UP, which you know is Mackinac, Luce, Schoolcraft. Growing up in Engadine, you either went to Newberry, for your groceries, or you went to Manistee for a dentist or a doctor's appointment. So that's four of the counties right there. I'm lucky in the fact that now most of my immediate family is living in Escanaba and have been since 1985. So it's a second home to me there, and I'm always over there and going back and forth. And finally, Menominee County, which is just, it'd be like me going from Engadine to Manistee is that distance from Escanaba. And I know most of the representatives come from that district right now, so that would not be hard for me to get there and help represent that district as well. So I'm going to be on that end as well as live on the east end, so I'm very unique in the fact that I'm going to be all over the district anyway. Well, there's really four things, and I'm open to all kinds of issues and information. But in going around it's basically the fraud and abuse. I think we pay taxes, and I think every taxpayer deserves to have some explanation to make sure that their tax money is spent wisely and not going, to some program or organization we know nothing about. And I think you've seen all kinds of things like that on the news. So I'd like to cut out as much fraud and abuse as we can. You can't tell me that we don't have any kind of abuse in Medicaid in the state of Michigan if you compare it to Minnesota. So I think that there's some cases that we can actually look at and cut out the scammers and different things that prey on our senior citizens and our working families. So that's one of the areas I want to make government responsible budget-wise. Mm-hmm. The other things that are important to me is being with the school board in our schools. We've got to make sure our schools are well funded. One of the things that a categorical that I find is missing is we have a lot of schools in the UP that are run down, and a lot of them we don't have funding to, replace boilers, big stuff like the roofs and different things like that. And maybe it's time we step back and look at how we can make our schools more viable for the 21st century. And I don't think we put a lot of money, especially in the UP. That's what I'm working on, particularly in Engadine, by going after that $8.1 million grant. If I'm successful here, maybe I can replicate that. Maybe if it's doing one school at a time, I'll do one school at a time, but I'd like to, expand it and try to do as much as we can. But I think it's also important to look at the funding and how our schools are funded. And I know with the changes, and there's other politicians that are calling for the elimination of our income tax as well as our property tax. That's going to be a big hill to climb to try to come up with replacements for those types of fundings. And maybe it's an opportunity as well to look at how we can do things differently to keep everything viable and even make it more competitive. I can speak on the fact that if you look at our schools right now, our transportation, for example, is a categorical. Well, the Quamanon schools in Lewis County is the biggest geographic school district in the state of Michigan. And someone said, well, what happens if you consolidate that with Engadine? Now you've just taken the biggest geographic location in the state of Michigan and made it bigger. How does that make sense? You know, and yet we get Lewis County and I'm sorry, the Quamanon schools and Engadine schools get funding for transportation costs. That was a fairly new categorical that just came in a couple years ago. Before they weren't. But at the same time, these schools downstate that are only a half a block in their school district where most of the students are walking are getting the same type of funding. You know, so I think there's got to be some kind of revisions and all that. So the schools are second. The third thing is I'm looking at our mental health. We've got to start taking care of ourselves and our neighbors. And there's a lot of things. I've talked with a number of sheriffs and police officers, because right now they're, with the elimination of our mental health institutions, the one that particularly that was in Newberry, we have all kinds of people that don't have places to go, that are in trouble mentally, either with mental health or substance abuse. We don't have that many beds, and we have to find a solution to try to solve for that and help those people out and help ourselves out. So mental health is also pretty big, which is why I'm part of the LMAS board as well as North Care, to try to understand that. Senator McBroom actually has introduced some legislation that I think is at least someone is trying to do something. I don't know if it's completely there yet, but that's something I think everybody should look at to try to expand that and grow in the Upper Peninsula. I was very lucky in that when I became Commissioner of Mackinac County, I was actually placed in the Brownfield Committee. One of the things that the County Commission did was purchase a 24.2 acre parcel of land in the city of St. Ignace. With that land, the intention was to then develop it for working families. So I got in at the initial cut of that because, again, I'm good at trying to find money. One of the things I wanted to do was find and I applied for the county, a $1.5 million grant with MISHTA for infrastructure on that 24.2 acres, because we had water, we had sewage, we had electric that were just along that edge. We just needed to and develop the roads. We just needed to do that for that parcel of land. In doing that, we had two challenges, and I'm not so sure we've solved for both, but one of the two challenges is, how do you make it affordable and how do you keep it affordable? And I think we're approaching this uniquely from a brownfield perspective, in that we can keep it affordable, providing, you know, we use that type of funding and that type of source, you know, where we kind of watch TIF and do different things along that road. So now how do you make it affordable to working families? We worked with a number of developers. One of the things, we had this one developer company that was very interesting, and their approach was, well, how can we do this? We decided in a committee that we're going to reverse engineer how these houses are funded. So what that meant is who do we want to buy the homes? Well, there's hospital workers, because the Straits Area Hospital is expanding. There's a number of law enforcement officers who live below the bridge that work above the bridge. We've got Graymont that's actually expanding and maybe going to a third shift eventually. We've got Enbridge, who's going to be big here before too long. So we're looking at, well, how much do these make? So by reverse engineering, finding out what the income levels are, that's what we decided to focus on, those types and sizes of housing. So that's what we're going to focus on, is to try to attract those folks coming in, and we're looking at doing about 76 to 100 units. So now the next step is, how do we do this so that we don't necessarily have a huge influx in housing costs and real estate in the area? You're always going to have some impact. And then how do you take this and again make it affordable? So we looked at how it's affordable. So what we decided we were going to do is we had a couple of people say, well, what's wrong with modular homes, or what's wrong? There's nothing wrong with modular homes. We want something more that'll hold the value and structure. So when we looked at this developer that was doing it, we decided, why don't we build the homes on the parcel of land and then move it? I mean, we could still do it in sections, and we could possibly do it at 10 at a time, and then hit the market, see how well it went, and work with the local banks along with TIF and try to help them get funded. And again, it would stay affordable should they turn, because of the TIF situation, for at least 10 years or however many years we wanted to do it. And then build another 10, build another 10, and try to do it smartly to see what the market absorbs, see how fast we can do it. If they go fast, we know we hit the mark. And so we're trying to do this smartly, as opposed to just buying land, putting up housing, and saying, here you go. And if that works, I'd like to duplicate those efforts on, the western end of Mackinac County, Alger County, Delta County. I think that would help us draw working families, keeping working families, at least here, for affordable housing, because darn well we need plumbers, electricians, contractors in the area, because we're losing them, and we're losing them fast. And I think that might be a way to keep the younger generation here. So that's kind of how we're addressing housing.